So welcome. Today we are talking about E-rate and preparing to file the Form 471. And this is part 4 in a series of webinar sessions that we've hosted to share important information about E-rate and how schools and libraries can take advantage of and maximize that federal funding source. If we haven't met before, my name is Rachel Shemlin, and I am one of the E-rate and broadband education consultants in the Division of Libraries and Technology at DPI, primarily working with schools. Before we move on, I'd like to invite my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, folks. I'm Bill Herman. I have a job that's similar to Rachel's, but I focus primarily on working with libraries.
And I'm Bob Bolker. As some of you know, I've been around for a while. I worked for the department for many years, retired from full-time work back about 2012, but have continued to assist the department in broadband issues, including broadband connectivity and specifically the E-rate as well.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bob. And before we move on, I forgot to mention that you can ask questions in the chat box, and we'll continue to monitor that throughout the session. At the end, we will also turn off the recording and stay on the call to be able to answer questions. And then finally, if you're interested in having transcription turned on, live transcription can't be turned on by the presenters, but individuals can go up to the 3 dots at the top and turn on captioning if you would like to see this with closed captioning. Once the video is posted to our website, there will be closed captioning on each throughout the video. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. There we go. So in our previous webinars and with our other trainings, we shared helpful information about E-rate, calculating Category 2 budgets. We did an introduction of E-rate. We talked about the bidding rules and best practices, as well as filing the Form 470. Today we're focusing on preparing to file the Form 471, and we're going to get started by doing a quick review of the E-rate timeline. So in terms of the E-rate application process, this is a quick visual overview of the forms and the process. The process starts sometime after July 1st with filing the Form 470, and that is posting your bid or your request for services. After that time, you keep the bid up for 28 days. You go through the bids using a evaluation matrix and select the bid using price as the primary factor. And then you go ahead and file the Form 471 to request funding from USAC for your discount percentage. USAC will issue a funding commitment decision letter during the summer, usually during the summer and into the fall, and that will have the details of whether or not your funding request is approved or denied. Then the applicant files a Form 486 to let USAC know that they've started services and they're compliant with SEPA. And that Form 486 has to be filed within 120 days after the service start or within 120 days of the funding commitment decision letter, whichever is later. And then finally, in terms of billing, applicants file a Form 472 to pay for the services in full and request reimbursement from USAC. That's called the BEAR form. Or they can choose to go with the Form 474 SPI method, in which the provider bills the applicant at a discounted rate, and then they go to USAC to get reimbursed for the difference. There's also a form not listed on this overview slide, the Form 498. And that form is one that you have to work on with your business manager because it includes the bank routing information required to receive any reimbursements. Bill and Bob, anything before we move on?
No, looks good.
Okay.
Nope, sounds good.
Thank you. So then just a few more details about that process. Maybe this is a reiteration of what I already said, but on the Form 470, that's when you're requesting in detail the eligible services that you need. And then you can also choose with that to file to attach an RFP, a request for proposal, as part of that Form 470. We discussed this more in detail in one of the previous webinars. You have to leave that bid open and posted for at least a minimum of 28 days so that providers can review and respond to the bid. And then once your 28 days is over, you can evaluate the responses using cost as the primary factor and select a provider. Then you'll use that information to file the Form 471 and request funding. So that's how the whole process goes through all the different forms.
Back in my E-rate days, I did it for quite a number of years. It's been a while. It's been 6 years since I've filed for E-rate, although it hasn't changed that much. And I did it for 15 years, starting from the very start of the program. And one of the things that I learned that made it much easier to pull all the information together and file the Form 471 is, before even going in to file, make a spreadsheet for each of the FRNs that you're planning on filing, and write down each of the items that are on this bulleted list. Because once you have that all in front of you in a spreadsheet, actually going to the Form 471 and filling it in is very easy, instead of having to stop and look up a spin number or look how much that quote was for. It makes the process of filing very, very easy and smooth. Just sort of a suggestion on how to organize yourself before you get filing.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, and I guess one other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Rachel, I think you already said that Rachel's going to post this presentation basically right after it's over on the DPI website. So if there's information on these slides that you didn't get a chance to write down, you'll be able to just look at the PowerPoint.
Yeah, good point, because this list is pretty extensive, but it makes the whole process a lot faster. We also have a link on the presentation to some training videos that USAC has provided. The USAC is the organization that administers the E-rate program. They have short 2-minute training videos that are pretty good and walk you through the process. And then we've also linked to filing guides here. They're PDFs that were created by our colleague Julie Tritschell in Pennsylvania. And they include screenshots and go more in depth screen to screen what you'll see once you go into Epic to file the Form 471. They include step-by-step video and written directions, which is helpful. And so, Bill, I think this is the point where we start talking a little bit specifically about BadgerNet, Teach BadgerNet, and WISC-Net.
So yeah, BadgerNet, as it relates to E-rate, is, I would say, one of the most confusing topics for people who are filing E-rate and use BadgerNet. I will even say that we at DPI from time to time have to remind ourselves the basics about it. So if your school district uses BadgerNet through Teach, you get a transport circuit from Teach. The basic points to remember are: you do not need to file a Form 470 for either internet transfer, either transport or internet access, because those are both part of the BadgerNet contract. And the RFP for that was issued in 2015, I think, or 2016, which included a Form 470. So basically, Teach took care of filing the Form 470 for both of those services, for ISP and for transport. So once you've signed up with Teach, you don't have to file a Form 470 for either service. The only reason for filing a Form 470 would be if you think you're going to stop using BadgerNet and use somebody else's service instead. So no Form 470 is needed. The next part is more confusing because once it's time to file your Form 471 to indicate what services you want, you don't have to file a Form 471 for your BadgerNet circuit, because that's something that Teach takes care of. They file a Form 471 to cover all of the circuits that they purchased for Teach customers. I don't know what it is, Bob, a $5 or $6 million RFP. And then they get a discount for that. So they buy those circuits from AT&T at full price, and then they get a discount for all those costs from E-rate. So no Form 471 for your BadgerNet circuit, but you have to file a Form 471 for your ISP service, which I think in almost every case on BadgerNet is WISC-Net on BadgerNet. But to make things even a little more confusing, the provider of ISP service that is WISNet on Badgernet is AT&T. So WISNet is a subcontractor on Badgernet. So when you file your Form 471 for ISP service, the provider that you're going to list is AT&T. And I think on the next slide, Rachel, there's a maybe a little bit later, probably on the next slide after this, there's a link that takes you to basically a Google Doc that has all the information you're going to need to file your Form 471 for internet access. All the details are there. So again, once the presentation is over, Rachel will post this and you'll see, I think on the next slide, a link that points to that information. But stepping back, big overview, no Form 470 for internet access or for transport if you're on Badgernet. No Form 471 for your circuit on Badgernet, but you do have to file a Form 471 for your ISP service, and the provider is going to be AT&T. Did I miss anything there? Is okay, Bob?
No, I guess I don't want to get too far into this either, Bill, but people might obviously ask, you know, this sounds rather convoluted, rather complex, but the bottom line is it's all based in part on how the Department of Administration bid out services last time in 2015 and 16 for the new BadgerNet contract. So again, I don't want to get into all of the details on this, but it simply resulted in this current situation that we're dealing with where AT&T is the provider and you use the AT&T spin for internet access, but underneath that, if you will, WISCnet is the actual subcontractor that AT&T works with for internet access. So all I can say is the Department of Administration is already working on the next BadgerNet contract, and certainly from the DPI perspective, one of the chief recommendations we made to them is let's not get into this confusing situation with the next contract. Let's make sure we get a much smoother and much more straightforward internet application process out of this. So let's hope that takes place, but that's down the road and not certainly for this next E-rate year coming up.
Yeah, we're already preparing our slides for 2024. But, so thank you, Bob. So one other question that will come up for not a small number of BadgerNet customers is if AT&T is still doing like they did in the past, if you're on BadgerNet, you will not receive a quotation for ISP service from AT&T. So you may think, well, how much am I going to pay? What should I fill in for my Form 471? And the answer is the cost is going to be the same this year as it was last year because that's written into the contract. So you can just pull out your last year's application for ISP service, your last year's Form 471, and copy exactly the same information into FY22 Form 471. And I think that's, yeah. So then just a few things here. The link to the instructions for filing that I mentioned a minute ago is in the first bullet point. There may be a small number of school districts or libraries that haven't yet had a WISNet router upgrade. They had to upgrade all the routers in the network because the one they were using stopped being supported by Cisco. I think very nearly all, if not all, of those routers have been replaced. But if you've been in contact with WISNet and your router hasn't yet been replaced, the information that you'll need for filing your Form 471 is in the link on the second bullet point. And an important note, when you look at the form that's linked on the first bullet point that says one of the items you need to know to fill in the information on your Form 471 for ISP service is the expiration date of the BadgerNet contract. And sometime in the last 6 months, we learned that the contract expiration date that we have been referring people to was January 31st of 2023. And some people may remember that was in fact, we've been contacted by people who remember that was the contract expiration date that we used to give. When you look at the instructions that we have now this year, you'll see that it's listed as a year later. And that is the best way of describing what happened is that DOA reinterpreted the BadgerNet contract so that basically they found that they discovered that it was actually a year later than they had thought. So whatever, I don't know how to exactly describe what happened there, but the bottom line is what's in yellow is the actual current true expiration date of the BadgerNet contract. And one of the main things that means is that this year will be same as ever because this E-rate season begins on July 1st of 2022 and extends to June 30th of 2023. So that's still before the BadgerNet contract will end. Next year will be a different story, but we don't have to worry about that yet. Oh, for those few school districts or libraries who may still not have had a router upgrade, on the DPI website, this is a picture of the screen that you can go to that provides the information that you need. You shouldn't need to go to this to get this information if your router has already been replaced. Rachel, back over to you.
Sure. So a quick note about program integrity assurance. Program integrity assurance is responsible for reviewing all applications to verify the discount level, the eligibility of the services, the amount requested. And many applicants will be contacted by PIA. It's an opportunity for you to make corrections to your application, and often they ask for additional information and documentation. So please understand, they're not trying to stop you from getting funded, but they need to make sure that your request is legitimate and following the program rules. So I guess most importantly, know what the deadline is for responding to a PIA request, and you need to meet that deadline. If you can't meet it, you can request an extension in the EPIC portal, and be sure to read the question, the inquiry carefully, and understand exactly what they're asking for you to document. If you're not certain, you want to make sure to email the reviewer to request clarification. And that's when you can also reach out to DPI for assistance. It's important that you document what they're asking for you to complete in a clear and well-organized way to make it easy for the reviewer to review and work through that process.
One of my favorite quotations related to PIA is, "It may seem like they're your enemy because they're stopping you from getting funding or standing in your way. They're not your enemy." Really, someone's like crinkling some wrappers or something.
I got it, Bill, sorry.
Okay, thanks. And one of a high USAC representative, I can't remember who, once said, "We don't want you to not get funded," and that's the case. And Bob, I think you may be able to share the statistics for funding for FY21, but very, very few denials and almost no applications still pending, right, Bob?
Right, it was well up over 90% of applications have been funded. And I'd have to go back and look at that number too, Bill, but it was down in the small single percentage points of applications that had been denied. And again, I'd have to go back looking at previous years, but just eyeballing that and knowing previous years in a general sense in relationship to the applications not being funded or being denied, if you will. I think we had the lowest number of denials in this current July 1st of 2021 E-rate year, which is very good news for the most part. And I'll just add to this, from what Rachel and Bill have said, especially on the PIA questions that they ask, unfortunately, sometimes they'll use bureaucratically laden language as you read through a particular question answer. Sometimes they'll use double negatives, so you have to read through it carefully and try to figure out, okay, is the right answer to this a yes answer or a no answer? And the bottom line is, if you're having trouble making that interpretation, which is not too unusual at all, please by all means contact us, because for the most part, we likely have seen that type of question come from somebody else before, maybe this year, maybe the previous year, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And we can certainly help you out to the extent possible to ensure that you make the right question, you provide the information that's going to satisfy the PIA folks so that you don't be one of those small number of schools or libraries that are denied.
Very good points. Very good points. We had a very short presentation today, short webinar. I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet, but I think we'll stay on and see if anybody has questions that we can assist with. We've got our contact information here and the contact information for Matt Yakey. He's the Teach Administrator, and he is the go-to person for everything with BadgerNet. If you have questions, I would suggest also reaching out to Matt. So I'm going to go ahead, Bill and Bob, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can stay on for any questions. I don't see any in the chat right now.
My bad on this, Rachel. Did we have a slide? I don't recall one seeing that provided the approximate timeline for the application process from the 471 perspective.
We didn't include a slide this year because we're still waiting on USAC to firm those timelines up, but we could talk about what we've seen in past years.
Right. I could just mention that for one thing, we haven't seen the eligible services list for the upcoming July 1st, 2022 E-rate year come out. That usually is released by the FCC and USAC about the middle of November, the latter half of November. So we're right in that time frame in which we're likely to see the E-rate eligible services list come out. And usually it's about that same time then into early December, perhaps, when the FCC will release the time frame in which you can first apply for the Form 471, and then the absolute funding deadline to submit that Form 471. We do not anticipate, or at least certainly haven't heard anything on the regular calls we have with USAC staff, that the time frame for this upcoming year is going to be radically different than it has been over the last several years. So that means for the most part, we expect that 471 application window to open probably the second week of January, which isn't too far down the road. And then the close again, probably in that last week or so of March. I think this current year was about March 25th or something of that nature. So again, it's highly likely that we'll have about the same time frame for filing the 471 for this upcoming year as we have the last several years. And I should just quickly add, that means, as everyone knows, I hope that if you're going to be filing the Form 471 and we're looking at about a March 25th, March 28th deadline, you've got to back up at least 28 days as an absolute minimum to file any Form 470, since you can't file a Form 471 until that 28-day window passes. And we always tell folks that a more realistic deadline for filing that Form 470 is probably the early part of February, so that you have plenty of time to evaluate any bids that you might get in, plenty of time to file a Form 471, especially if you run into any problems. You know, the last thing you know, or the last thing you want, is filing the Form 471 on the last absolute day, and then there's some problems in the Epic Online application portal, or you have some other issues that you have to deal with. You don't want to get caught from that perspective.
Great point. And once we see the eligible services list be released and we have solid timelines from USAC, we will send out a message to the E-rate listserv with that, with the solidified dates, the finalized information. Thank you, Bob.
And I guess we could also add, Rachel and Bill here, that in addition to not expecting any major changes in the time frame for this application process, we don't also expect any major changes at all in the eligible services list. Chances are it's very much going to be either exactly similar or very similar to the eligible services list that we're dealing with for this current year.
Right. Thank you, Bill. Anything additional?
No.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that folks that have other things they need to get to can